Hello, fellow jazz pianists. My name is Matt Buchman. I'm the Director of Jazz Studies at UW-Stevens Point. And I'm here today to talk about the WSMA Required Jazz Piano Etude for 2022. The first section is where we get to demonstrate our stride piano understanding. The eighth notes are swinging, and so they're tripletized. And with the left hand, at this tempo, I suggest using a little bit of pedal to connect the bass note and the chords until you get to measure 8, where that should be played a little bit dry with all those quarter notes. It sort of reminds me of Thad Jones' big band writing, where we have this sort of quarter note, constant quarter note sound. On the second page, we have some chord symbols to deal with, and it's asking us to play two-handed voicings in this comping section. I would highly recommend picking up a copy of Frank Mantooth's book, Voicings for Jazz Keyboard. And the formula is very simple. It's a 5-note voicing with either the root or the fifth in the top, that's the right hand, and fourths beneath that, perfect fourths. So for instance, the first chord is G7, and I'm going to put G on top, 2 perfect fourths below it, D and A, and then I'm going to play the 3rd and the 7th in my left hand, and that gives us the 4th and 5th notes. So there's my G7 chord. I can also use the 5th in the top of the voicing, again with my right hand. So that's D, 2 fourths below that, and then the 3rd and the 7th again in the left hand. Okay, so I have 2 different possibilities for that dominant chord. And based on what chord you're going to next, you may want to choose one or the other. For instance, if I have the 5th in the top, and I look at my next chord, the D flat 7, all I need to do is move everything in my right hand down a half step. Now I have the D flat, the root of that chord in the top of my right hand, perfect fourths below that, and happily the 3rd and the 7th of the G7 chord are the 3rd and the 7th of the D flat 7 chord, except the relationship has been inverted. So B natural is the 3rd of the G chord, F is the 7th of the G chord, but F is the 3rd of the D flat chord, and B natural or C flat is the 7th of the D flat chord. So that tritone is shared between those 2 dominant chords. So there's my G chord, there's my D flat chord. And if I did it using the other possibility with G on top, all I have to do is move up a half step, and I've got the 5th of the D flat chord. Okay, so that formula, either the root of the 5th on top and then down in perfect fourths, 3rd and the 7th in the left hand, is going to work for probably 80% of the chords in this particular section. There are dominant chords with sharp 9s in them. The first one is in measure 18. And again, this is Frank Mantooth's, comes straight out of Frank Mantooth's book. But there is a concept that he talks about in that book that he terms Polychord Fractions. And basically what that means is that you can look at altered dominant chords as major triads positioned over, again, the 3rd and the 7th in the left hand. And you get these altered extensions like sharp 9. So for instance, in measure 18, we have a sharp 9 chord, and I can think of that as a major triad based on the flat 3 of the chord of the moment. So translation, the chord of the moment is an A, the flat 3 is a C natural, and if I build a major triad on that C natural, I get C major, and if I put that on top of the 3rd and the 7th of an A7, so C sharp and G in this case, I get a sharp 9 chord. The C natural in this case is that sharp 9. You can use that same formula for the E7 sharp 9 in that section as well. If you have any questions about any of these concepts ever, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'd be more than happy to talk you through anything that is unclear, schedule a time for a lesson. I'm going to keep on moving though. Letter B, we have a Latin section, so you want to be thinking even eighth notes for this section. And the comping in that vamp section, the section that asks you to repeat it 4 times, that comping formula can continue into the next section, and the formula is this. The F minor 7 to B flat 7, this is in measure 29 and 30. So I'm going to use 1 and 7, 3 and 5, 1 and 7 on the left, 3 and 5 on the right for the F minor chord. And then for the B flat 7 in measure 30, I'm going to keep the right hand the same, and I'm going to move to 1 and 3 in the left hand. Okay? And that's good voice leading. We've moved very little. In fact, kept the right hand the same. So, okay, so I think of that as an A voicing and a B voicing. The A voicing is 1-7, 3-5 with 9 added if you like. The B voicing is 1-3 and then 7-9. And whenever you're going from a minor 7 to a dominant 7, a fifth away or a fourth away, you can alternate between the A voicing and the B voicing. This is connected to the concept of 2-5-1. So that formula can continue for this Latin section at letter B. Next we get to the Jazz Waltz, and I interpreted measures 58 to 65 pretty literally. I think I may have added some rhythm to one of the measures, but other than that, I played those voicings as exactly as written, and both in terms of the notes as well as the rhythms. For the comping in the Jazz Waltz section, I would suggest that you follow the instructions from the previous 2 sections, either the 1-7-3-5 from the Latin section, or the Frank Mantooth voicing formulas from the swing section. Either one of those will work for the comping in the Jazz Waltz. And then finally we get to the Ballad section. I want to point out that in measure 77, I believe there is an editorial error. I think there's an A sharp that's missing from that chord, because the chord symbol tells us that it's an A7 flat 9, and the flat 9 would be an A sharp or B flat, and that's missing from the score, so I would add the A sharp. The notation is pretty straightforward until we get to letter H, which is where you have the opportunity to improvise while also accompanying yourself with the left hand. So I'm going to talk about the left hand first, and then I'll talk about the improvisation with the right hand. In the left hand, I would suggest using Rootless Voicings. In the performance that you're about to see, I did some arpeggiation in the left hand as well, but I really rely quite heavily on what's called Rootless Voicings in the left hand. If you're unfamiliar with that, again, please feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to clarify that. But essentially, Rootless Voicings rely on a system where in the left hand either 3 or 4 notes are played, and often these voicings omit the root of the chord. And very frequently they're based, the bottom is either the 7th or the 3rd of the chord. So for instance, the second chord that we have is a C7 flat 9. And I'm going to use the 3rd in the bottom of that, an E natural. And then I'm going to play G, B flat, and D flat. Okay, so we don't have C in that chord, but we have the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and flat 9. Just prior to that, we have a G minor 7, flat 5. And if I move that E natural up a half step to F, and now I have 7 in the bottom, and actually for this chord I do have the root in the voicing, but that voicing is very close, that G minor 7, flat 5 voicing is very close to the C7 flat 9. Okay? And if we continue on to the F minor 7, E flat, G, A flat, C, I've got a 7 in the bottom, no root, and that 7 goes down a half step to a D, and now I have, for the B flat 7 chord, D, G, A flat, C, or 3rd, 13, 7, 9. And that system can continue all the way through. So that's a little bit about the left hand. In the right hand, we have some scales to deal with. And I like to think about preparing to improvise in really 3 stages. Number 1, we have to understand what the notes are in the chord and in the scale that goes with that chord. Now there's I think a very straightforward way of figuring out what scales go with what chords. You might check out my January 2020 article from the WMEA journal, and the article is entitled Decoding and Gap Filling. And essentially, in the article, I talk about just filling in the 3 missing notes for any given chord. So for instance, in the G minor 7 flat 5 chord that we just talked about, if we know what the notes in the chord are, G, B flat, D flat, and F, I only have an A, a C, and an E flat to fill in. I already have a G, a B, a D, and an F. And so looking at what chords are happening around this spot, the fact that G minor 7 flat 5 goes to C7, which then resolves to F minor. F minor has an A flat in it. So by ear, I'm going to fill in that gap with an A flat. And then by ear, I'm going to fill in the next one with a C. And then once again by ear, my ear tells me E flat. And so all of a sudden, with just filling in those 3 notes, the missing A flat, C, and E flat, I've got an entire scale. Happens to be called Locrian. If you don't know the name of it, it's not the end of the world, but if by ear you can fill in those gaps, that's what the most important thing is. So going through each chord and determining what scale would best fit that particular spot is the first step. And then the second step is to experiment with those scales by creating little patterns or seeing what kind of melodies you can create. And I'm just talking one chord at a time. Think of each chord as having a little fermata over it, so that you can just sit and hover over each chord one at a time and really become comfortable and intimate with those scales. Okay, so that's the second phase. And then the third phase is to get comfortable connecting those chords one to the next through good voice leading and always sort of knowing where you're going. And sometimes you can discover that two chords have almost the same set of notes in it. For instance, I'll give you a little tip. In measure 94, there's a G flat 7 chord. And in the next measure, there's a C7 sharp 9. Well, those two chords can be served by the exact same scale. G flat 7 chord. You can use what's called a Lydian dominant scale. So G flat, A flat, B flat, C. There's the Lydian part. D flat, E flat, F flat, or E natural, and G flat, okay? So there's my Lydian dominant. And when I go to C7 sharp 9, I can use what's called a superlocrian scale. Now those two scales are the same set of notes. It's just that one we're thinking of as starting on G flat and the other is starting on C, so they have to be named differently. But that's an example of two chords that seem on the face of it pretty unrelated, but when you do a little investigating and gap filling, you discover that they're actually the same set of notes. So that's it. I hope that this little tutorial hasn't gone too long. I want to encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions. In your practice overall, keep a steady pulse, practice with the metronome, have fun, and good luck.